Hey gang, today's video features a lot of firsts. My first time making a chair, my first time working with cedar, and my first time using lap joints. Today's video we're going to be making some modular deck furniture. It should be some very entertaining content, so why don't you stick around and see how things turn out. The first thing I'm going to do is cut as much of my wood into its rough length as possible because I don't want to have to keep changing table saw blades back and forth. That's a big time waster. I would also recommend, if need be, planing your boards before you cut them to the rough length. I had a lot of sniping on the ends of my boards, and if I had used the entire length of the board prior to cutting it to rough length, that would have limited the amount of sniping I had to deal with. For this build, I'm going to be using two different angles of lap joints, a regular 90-degree angle lap joint that I'm cutting here, as well as a 15-degree angle lap joint. That's why I have those boards nailed to the surface of my sled. If you're new to using lap joints like I was, take your time and cut lots of test pieces. That way you know your blade is set to the right height and your stop is set to the right distance. It'll help avoid a lot of frustration down the road. Because I was making the same thing multiple times over, I found myself thinking hard about what I could do to expedite the process. One of the things I came up with was marking one of my pieces with the correct angles and then transferring all of those angles over to all the other pieces, as you see here. It worked pretty well, and it saved me a decent chunk of time. I think my headlamp is actually one of my most frequently used tools. It got a little dark in the shop, so to get better light and see my marks, I whipped that bad boy out. One more tidbit I realized while cutting all these lap joints is that you really need to trust yourself and your measurements. I did not trust myself on the first couple of pieces because they weren't fitting together quite as easily as I thought they should. And so I took them back to the saw and cut another 1/8 or 1/16 of an inch off, and wouldn't you know it, I ended up with some loose lap joints. So probably a rookie mistake there, but I hope you learn from it. This Dado sled that I made a while back is really paying big dividends. I'll put a link in the description and up above in case you want to make your own. Maybe one day in the near future I'll upgrade it for something that's a little bit easier to use and better at cutting different angles and lengths and such, but until then, this one does alright. Just cutting a few angles on a few of these pieces here to add a little design flair, certainly not a necessary step. Alright, we are ready for some glue. So these are the side pieces or the legs of my patio furniture chairs. Anytime you're building something that's going to be outside and you're using glue on it, make sure you use the right type of glue. I had to go out and buy some Titebond 3 for this project. It's waterproof and it is rated for exterior and interior applications. Ordinarily, I use Titebond 2, but in this case, I had to upgrade. Titebond, not a sponsor. Yet. Pay a little bit better attention to your glue squeeze out than I did. I didn't do a very good job of cleaning up after myself, and now I'm paying for it. Didn't clean it up, had to try and sand it off, and in spite of my best efforts, I could not get it all sanded off, so that was fun. I wonder how much of the glue I used got squeezed out onto my workbench and onto my floor. Hopefully less than 50%. I forgot to trim off a few pieces of excess wood before I assembled these pieces. Fortunately, I have this really slick circular saw guide. If you want to make your own, check out the link. As I mentioned earlier, some of my lap joints were less than stellar, so I'm going over them with my belt sander to flatten everything out, and then I'll go over them with my palm sander just like I would with any other woodworking project. Hey gang, if you found this content helpful, or at least entertaining, don't forget to hammer that like button. That said, I only sanded them up to about 100 grit with my palm sander, Call me lazy or whatever else you want, but I just didn't think outdoor furniture needed a fine 220 grit or above sanding. Just gonna fill in a few gaps here. That was not the best color choice. Alright, now I'm ready for the final assembly, which requires me to drill a whole lot of pocket holes. I was really hoping to use dowel joinery on these just because I think good furniture doesn't use screws. Unfortunately, I was unable to make a reliable dowel joint jig, so here we are. On the plus side, pocket hole joinery is a whole lot faster, especially for someone who is not experienced with dowel joinery. If I had succeeded with the dowel joints, I would probably still be in my garage assembling these chairs instead of bringing all of you this wonderful content. You're probably asking yourself, Self, what are those yellow things he's putting under his chair slats? Well, those are yardsticks. I wanted my slats to be offset ever so slightly, and those yardsticks were about the perfect thickness, roughly 1/8 of an inch. For whatever reason, I just think those offsets look a little bit nicer than if the slats are flush. To get the proper and consistent spacing on my slats, I just glued up a few pieces of plywood. Eventually, I did realize that trying to apply glue to a vertical surface is incredibly stupid. I found that attaching all the slats to one side of the chair and then to the other was the easiest and quickest method of assembling the chairs. I made enough spacers so that I had one between each of the slats to ensure consistent spacing between them on either side of the chair. Now I'm assembling the ottoman or the chase lounge. I haven't yet decided whether or not I want to attach it to my sectional, so I think that will determine what it's called. I'm not really sure. Construction of this piece is more or less the same as the base of the chairs that I made. Unfortunately, my yardstick spacers were a little bit more difficult to work with on this one because all of the slats were completely enclosed, unlike with my chair. This also made getting the proper offset for the slats much more challenging, but I eventually got them where I wanted them, or at least close. And ultimately, when it's all said and done, everything's going to be covered by furniture pads anyway, so hopefully nobody inspects things too closely. Alright, now it's time for the piece de resistance, as they say. This is the corner piece for my sectional, and I gotta say, this was some kind of nightmare to assemble. I was adamant that the corner piece still have angled backs to it, which made things extraordinarily complicated, at least for a novice woodworker like myself. To construct the corner piece for my sectional, I took two sides identical to the ones I used for my chairs and screwed them together at a 90-degree angle. Then I made a slightly modified version of those sides and attached that at exactly 45 degrees, or at least as far as you know. To figure out how to construct the slightly modified piece, I had to do a bit of math. Thank goodness for Mr. Pythagorean and his theorem. Side note, this is probably not the recommended use for a Craig jig, but you can actually do pocket holes on an angled piece like this, and it works just fine. Or at least it sure seemed like it did. Check back with me in a year or so, and we'll see if this piece is still upright. Working from the ground up, I constructed the base of this piece first, and then I added the slats, and everything seemed to be going pretty well until I started attaching the slats on the back side of the seat. That's when I realized that one of the sides was longer than the other, so I had to pull it off, cut it a little shorter, and reattach it, and fix the slats that were not the proper length. That's another rookie mistake. If I'm being honest, I knew that one was longer than the other because of how I screwed it up, but for some reason I didn't think that would matter. I don't know what I was thinking. Unfortunately, that was not the most challenging part of this build, not by a long shot. The back pieces were a giant pain. I could not come up with a good method for measuring the length or the angles of these pieces, so comment below if you have a solution to my problem, because I just ended up using a whole lot of trial and error, and eventually I got it about where I wanted it, although I can't say this was perfect. On the plus side, I got to use the tilt and the miter function of my miter saw at the same time, which I have never done before. So that's really exciting. So glad I got to experience that. Yeah, just look away for a minute while I trim off some excess because of poor measurements. Thank goodness for multi-tools. After all that, the seat was still way out of level, and I had some weird joints that I had to fix on the back corner of the seat. Mistakes will be made, projects will be delayed. Good thing I have a belt sander and an electric hand planer. I am extremely glad to be done with that corner piece. Now I just have to do some light sanding and apply some finish, and then I can relax on my brand new patio furniture. At this point, the sanding was mostly to remove any dry glue that I mentioned earlier, as well as to ease the edges so that I don't have to make any extra trips to the emergency room with my children. Time for the finish. Covering this much surface area is time consuming. After spending about 2 hours coating 3 pieces of my furniture, I thought, hey, maybe my sprayer will make this go a little bit more quickly. It was a good thought, but spraying on finish in the dark was probably not a great idea, and I also don't think I'm going to be trying to use this sprayer anymore either. I could not get it to lay down a good amount of finish. It was either too much or not enough. You would think there's a happy medium, but I was not able to find it. Hopefully coats 1.5, 2, and 3 go a little bit better. So this is the aftermath of my spray job. As you can see, it did not turn out very good. Got lots of drips. And in this light, it really doesn't even do it justice. It looks pretty terrible. So I'm going to do my best to get that sanded off, and I will reapply the spar urethane with a paintbrush. I would not recommend spraying spar urethane with the particular sprayer that I used, which is a Wagner Control Painter handheld HVLP sprayer. I think if you had a good HVLP setup, you could apply the finish fairly quickly, but I do not have a good setup, so I will be spending hours upon hours applying finish. The recommended process for applying spar urethane to raw wood is apply 3 coats, sanding lightly in between each coat. I sanded heavily after my spray coat. Would you look at that torrential downpour in the background? We really needed that. Almost done. If anybody wants to buy me a sprayer, I could probably crank out these videos on a far more regular basis. Hint hint. Oh boy, we are ready to attach the pads. I'm just going to Velcro them to the back and the bottom so that I don't have to chase them to the next county in the event of a windstorm. I bought some hardware to connect all of my patio furniture, making it into a nice sectional. But I'm pretty sure it's not intended for outdoor use, so I'm hoping a little bit of Flex Seal spray will solve that problem for me. Fingers crossed. I may have overcomplicated the attachment of these sectional brackets. Nope, not that way. Try again. Oh, there we go. I got it. They should call these things complication squares. So it turns out I could pretty much just line up the top of the bracket with the top of the seat and mark the holes and drill it in, just making sure that they were placed at the same location on each chair. You're also going to want to make sure that one of them is facing up and one of them is facing down so that they interlock properly. You may find this hard to believe, but I actually realized that before I started attaching them. There is actually quite a bit of play in these brackets, which might not be desirable for some applications, but for my purposes, it was perfect. Oh man, I can't wait to start relaxing on my deck. Let's assume for a second that very minimal mistakes were made on this project. Comment below and tell me what you think I could sell it for. I'm really curious. And best of all, it's modular, so if I decide I want to have coffee with a friend, boom, 2 chairs. Or maybe I need a little alone time to read a good book. Boom, chair and an ottoman. Or better yet, maybe I want to get cozy around a fire with some friends. The possibilities are endless. Thanks for watching, and remember, sweat for it. Don't go into debt for it.